You settle into the dim quiet of a medieval scriptorium, a place where the air feels thick with dust, candle smoke, and the patient weight of unfinished manuscripts. You are not a monk, not yet, or not officially, but you have been working among them long enough that you have inherited the habits of silence and stillness that shape their days. In this world, your primary duty is simple enough. You copy words. You transfer them faithfully from worn, fading parchments onto fresh sheets, prepared by hands as diligent as your own. It is monotonous work, and that monotony is precisely what gives it meaning. The monastery around you has stood for nearly 2 centuries, though no one seems to know its exact founding date. It sits in a region of rolling hills somewhere in Western Europe, surrounded by farmland and hedgerows that change color with the seasons, but rarely vary in form. These lands have endured wars, famines, winters harsher than anyone expected, and more than one change in leadership. Yet, the monastery remains steady. Inside these walls, time moves slowly, resisting the urgency found beyond the cloister. Before you copy a single word, the parchment must be prepared. It arrives from the tannery, stiff, pale, and scraped clean of the animal it once belonged to. The texture is slightly uneven, and you can feel the faint grain beneath your fingertips. It takes hours to smooth a single sheet, hours spent gently working pumice over its surface, brushing away imperfections, and working the page until it feels ready to receive ink. This is not glamorous work. It is not dramatic. But without this stage, the words would not sit cleanly. If they cannot sit cleanly, they cannot endure. You breathe slowly as you work the pumice stone, the rhythm steady and unchanging. Monks pass through the scriptorium occasionally, their sandals whispering against the stone floor, but none linger. Everyone has a task to fulfill, and the world within the monastery depends on that rhythm. There is a strange power in learning to do something unremarkable with remarkable consistency. When the sheet is ready, you take up the straight edge. Ruling the page is its own kind of art, one that few outside the scriptorium ever notice. With a thin thread dipped in charcoal dust, you snap faint lines across the parchment, marking where the script will sit. Without these lines, the writing would drift. The drift would grow with each page. The text would lose not only neatness, but authority. For order is part of what makes writing trustworthy. People of this time believe in the authority of words not because they are spoken with passion, but because they are written with care. You prepare your ink next. The ink pot contains a mixture of oak gall, iron salts, and gum, Arabic. The smell is earthy, metallic, and sharp. The kind of scent that stays in your clothes long after the day ends. Oak gall ink is durable, capable of outlasting the page itself, though it darkens over time and sometimes eats into the parchment. You stir the mixture with a thin stick, watching as the liquid slowly thickens. Some scribes prefer their ink thinner, for speed. Others prefer it thicker, for permanence. You sit somewhere in the middle, as you do with most things. The quill must also be shaped. Goose feathers are the most common, and you trim yours with a small knife, carving the nib into a clean edge. The first stroke of a new quill is always cautious. You dip the tip into the ink, shake off the excess, and make slow lines across a scrap of parchment to test the flow. The ink spreads evenly. The quill cuts a clean mark. You are ready. The manuscript you copy today is nothing extraordinary. It is a commentary on St. Augustine's writings, dense, repetitive, and deeply focused on theological arguments that have already been debated for generations. Yet you copy it as though it were a treasure, for your task is not to judge the text's excitement, but to preserve it. Somewhere, centuries from now, someone might read your handwriting and learn something from it, or perhaps no one will read it at all, and the book will gather dust in an archive until it crumbles. Either outcome is acceptable. The work remains the work. You begin your first letter of the day, a simple P, formed with slow, deliberate strokes. The script you use is a late Carolingian minuscule, round and open, easy to read for those who have been trained. Each letter flows into the next with gentle curves. The writing is not hurried. It is not designed to impress. It is meant to endure. The scriptorium is cold, even in the summer, for its stone walls trap the chill of early mornings. Your fingers sometimes stiffen, making writing more difficult. You pause often to warm your hands by the candle flame, rotating your wrists and stretching your fingers. Every scribe has their own method for maintaining endurance. Some keep small cloths of warm wool tucked beneath their sleeves. Some take brief walks in the cloister between paragraphs. Your own strategy is simple. You pace yourself. You write for 10 minutes, rest for 30 seconds. The monks call this your quiet rhythm, and they have grown accustomed to its predictability. Outside, the monastery's daily life unfolds in ways both simple and repetitive. The bell rings to mark the hours. Cooks prepare meals of pottage, bread, and occasionally fish. Gardeners tend to herbs used for both medicine and cooking. Novices sweep the cloisters and practice their chanting in the chapel. The routines interlock like gears, and if one breaks, the rest feel the strain. You are not a monk, but you live as they do. The work you perform offers you shelter, food, and a sense of purpose. Some days, you wonder what your life might have been had you not come here. Perhaps you would have become a merchant's clerk, perhaps a labourer in the fields. But fate or luck brought you into this world of books, and now your days are shaped by parchment and ink. Around midday, the scriptorium grows slightly brighter as the sun reaches its highest point, casting a diffused glow through the narrow, glassless windows. The glass used in wealthier monasteries remains expensive, and this monastery has chosen to spend its funds on livestock and land, not on luxuries. The result is a scriptorium filled with filtered, uneven light, which shifts as clouds pass overhead. You adjust your posture often to catch the light more clearly on your page. The work is slow, but slow becomes its own form of progress. You complete a few lines, then a few more. The movement becomes predictable, steady, almost soothing. You know precisely how far your hand must move to complete a letter. You know the pressure required to make the ink flow smoothly. You know the pattern of your breath and how it supports the flow of your writing. When you fall into this rhythm, hours can pass without you noticing. Sometimes, while copying the commentary, you find yourself pausing to consider the words. The author writes about the nature of time, about how humans experience it through memory, presence, and anticipation. You find yourself reflecting on your own time. You think of how every day feels the same, yet your manuscript grows slowly with each hour. Perhaps time, like writing, is built from small, steady strokes. In the late afternoon, the scriptorium becomes chill again. You wrap your cloak tighter around your shoulders and continue. You are halfway through the day's assigned portion of text when a faint crackle draws your attention. It is the sound of the quill beginning to split. Quills do not last long. Even the best ones break after a few hours of use. You set it aside and take up another. The trimming process repeats. The testing repeats. The work continues. As the sun sinks lower, the shadows grow longer. The monks around you prepare for the evening office. Soon, the bell will ring again. You dip your new quill into the ink and finish your final line of the day. The last word sits neatly between its neighbours, perfectly aligned with the ruled lines. You let out a quiet breath. You examine the page as a whole. It is clean, consistent, predictable. The qualities a scribe aims for. You have copied hundreds of pages like this one, and you will copy hundreds more. The monotony does not trouble you. In this world, monotony is stability. You clean your tools, wiping the quill, covering the inkpot, and laying the parchment flat beneath a wooden board so it will not curl overnight. As you gather your things, you glance at the next page of the source manuscript, and something unfamiliar catches your eye. A brief margin note, written in a hand you do not recognize, seems to raise a question about the accuracy of the text. It is subtle, almost hidden, between smudges and age-darkened corners. You return to the scriptorium the next morning with the same calm steadiness as always, your footsteps falling into the familiar pattern along the worn stone floor. The air still holds the faint scent of yesterday's extinguished candles, mingled with the earthy smell of parchment and ink. Yet something feels subtly different now, and you know precisely why. The margin note you discovered at the end of your previous day's work lingers in your mind like an unfinished sentence. The note was small, hastily written, and placed in a part of the manuscript few eyes would ever examine. You have seen margin notes before, corrections, clarifications, theological musings. But this one felt different. It did not amend the text, it questioned it. And scribes are not accustomed to questioning what they copy. As you settle at your desk, you unroll the source manuscript to that same page, letting the vellum relax under its own weight. You study the margin note more carefully in the morning light. The handwriting is tight and angular, suggesting someone who wrote with speed rather than care. The ink is darker than most of the text, though faded compared to your own. It cannot be more than a few decades old. The note reads only, Veritas, truth, not an accusation, not a correction, just a question. It is unclear whether the question refers to the line beside it or to something larger, the broader argument, perhaps, or the interpretation offered by the commentator. Medieval writing often mixes certainty with doubt. But doubt is rarely written so plainly. You dip your quill into ink and begin your daily task anyway, because one question, even a troubling one, does not release you from your duty. The rules remain the same. The routine remains the same. You copy each word with your usual discipline, maintaining regular spacing and clean letters. The monks around you come and go in their quiet procession. Occasionally, one offers a nod in your direction, the closest thing to conversation that is expected inside the scriptorium. Yet your mind continues to circle back to the comment in the margin. You were trained to preserve text, not interpret it. Your role is silent, almost invisible. Yet today, you cannot help feeling its weight in a different way, as though the accuracy of every stroke matters more than it did yesterday. By midday, you have completed a full page, ruled cleanly and written with steady lines. You place it under a wooden press to keep it flat, then rise to stretch your back and shoulders. The muscles ache in their familiar way, the ache of repetition rather than exertion. As you move, you notice Brother Aldred entering the scriptorium. He is one of the monastery's senior scribes, a man who has copied texts longer than you have been alive. His beard is streaked with grey, his hands calloused from years of trimming quills, yet his writing remains elegant and precise. He walks slowly, deliberately, as though careful not to disturb the air itself. He pauses at your desk, his eyes falling on your neatly pressed page. Clean work, he murmurs, his voice soft but warm. Your hand grows, steadier, each season. You thank him quietly, then hesitate before speaking again. Brother Aldred, you begin, trying to keep your voice low. May I ask a question about a manuscript? He raises an eyebrow. Questions are not forbidden, but they are uncommon. Of course, he says. What troubles you? You open the source manuscript to the margin note, placing your finger beside the word Veritas. Brother Aldred leans forward, squinting. Ah, he breathes, recognizing the handwriting immediately. This is the work of Brother Matthew. You have heard the name only a few times. Matthew was a scribe here long before your arrival, remembered for his meticulous work and his unusual tendency to leave commentary in the margins, something discouraged but not forbidden. Was he given to questioning texts? You ask. Brother Aldred folds his hands behind his back, thinking. He questioned everything, he replies. Not out of rebellion, but out of curiosity. He believed that even sacred writings gained strength from scrutiny. He pauses. Some found this troubling. You glance again at the small, almost timid word in the margin. Truth? It seems harmless enough, but the idea behind it is larger than its size. Should I copy the question? You ask. Brother Aldred shakes his head gently. No. Margin notes are not usually preserved unless they clarify meaning. This one was personal to Matthew. It is not part of the text. You nod, though something still feels unsettled. If the comment is not meant to endure, Why does it linger so clearly in your mind? Brother Aldred senses your hesitation. Remember, he says quietly, our task is not to decide truth. It is to preserve what we are given. With those words, he moves on, leaving you alone with your thoughts. You return to your desk, but the question continues to echo faintly in the back of your mind. You try to push it aside with the rhythm of your work, trim the quill, test the ink, shape the letters. But even as the hours pass, something about the margin note continues to tug at you. The work of a scribe depends on repetition, yet repetition does not prevent reflection. If anything, it encourages it. Your hands continue their practiced movement, while your mind wanders down quiet paths. You think about the enormous number of people whose lives have been shaped by written words, those who have found guidance, comfort, or instruction within them. You think of the generations of scribes whose lives were dedicated to copying texts they did not choose, texts they might not have understood, texts whose truth they were never encouraged to question. Perhaps the margin note bothers you because it suggests that someone before you did question it, and perhaps the question remains unanswered. As the afternoon light dims, you pause to rest your eyes. You look around the scriptorium. Rows of desks, each with its own small tools. Shelves, stacked with manuscripts in various stages of completion. The faint glow of candles beginning to catch against the stone walls. It strikes you how much knowledge has passed through this room over the years. Philosophy, theology, arithmetic, herbal remedies, histories of kings, chronicles of wars, stories of saints, even household manuals for managing estates. Each text has its own truth, its own purpose. Some contradict each other, yet all are preserved with the same care. You wonder how many margin notes like Matthew's have been lost over the centuries, tiny doubts erased by time, forgotten by the next scribe, overshadowed by the authority of the text. Your thoughts drift to the parchment in front of you. A simple sheet, smoothed by your hands, ruled by your straight edge. It will soon bear words that may outlast you. Perhaps the next scribe who copies your work centuries from now will see your handwriting and judge your precision. Perhaps they will wonder about your life, or perhaps they will see nothing beyond the words themselves. The chill of early evening settles in. You wrap your cloak more tightly around your shoulders and light a new candle. The flame flickers, throwing soft shadows across your page. You turn to the next leaf of the source manuscript, continuing the commentator's argument. He writes now about the nature of divine understanding, asserting that human interpretation is always flawed. His tone is confident, authoritative, but you cannot help noticing that the words feel different when read beside Matthew's simple question. You slow your pace without meaning to, not because the text is difficult, but because you have become more aware of its fragility. One misplaced stroke, one misread word, and the meaning could shift in ways no one intends. The responsibility feels heavier than usual. Late in the day, as you finish ruling a fresh page, Brother Aldred returns. He places a small wooden box on your desk. You look up, surprised. This was Matthew's, he explains. His tools, kept since his passing. I believe they may be of use to you. You open the box carefully. Inside are several quill knives, their blades worn, but well cared for. A small stone used for smoothing parchment, and a folded piece of vellum bearing Matthew's handwriting. You lift the vellum gently and unfold it. The writing is precise. The letters narrow but elegant. It appears to be Matthew's personal note, a reflection on his work rather than on any text. It reads, "To copy a text is to trust its author. To question a text is to trust its purpose. Both trusts carry weight, but only one invites understanding." You sit quietly with the note. It is the kind of reflection a scribe could spend years considering. Brother Aldred gives you a small nod, then leaves you alone again in the quiet. You fold the vellum carefully and return it to the box, though the words remain in your mind. You look again at the margin note in the manuscript, and something changes within you. The question feels less troubling now and more human, an echo from someone who once sat where you sit. thinking perhaps the same thoughts. You resume your work, letting your hand move with renewed steadiness. The scriptorium grows darker, the candlelight deepens, and the rhythm returns. Yet, the question lingers, not as a disturbance, but as an invitation to think more deeply about the truth behind the words you preserve, an invitation to understand your place within a long chain of hands, each shaping the continuation of knowledge. As your quill produces its final strokes for the day, forming a neat and quiet line of text, you cannot help but wonder, if even the scribes themselves carried doubts in the margins, what truths have been shaped or reshaped by the hands of those who copied them. The morning begins with a pale wash of light creeping through the scriptorium's narrow windows, barely enough to cut through the cool, bluish air. The candles have long since burned out, leaving behind thin trails of soot that cling to the stone walls. You enter quietly, as you do every morning. But today you carry the small wooden box Brother Aldred gave you, the tools of Brother Matthew, whose question in the margin continues to echo in your thoughts. The box feels heavier than it should, though it contains only a few worn knives, a smoothing stone, and a single folded vellum note. Perhaps the weight you feel is symbolic, a sense of connection to the scribe who left behind both the question and the quiet reflection you read the previous day. You set the box gently on your desk and prepare for your task. Today, you will complete your assigned manuscript. It is not a monumental work. It is not a text that will alter the course of kingdoms or challenge the doctrines of powerful men. It is simply another commentary, another link in the long chain of books that have shaped this monastery's library over centuries. And yet it feels different now. Perhaps because you understand more deeply the fragility of words. Perhaps because you have begun to see the humanity within the margins of these quiet pages. You begin your preparations. You smooth the final sheet of parchment with Matthew's stone, noticing how it glides across the surface with less friction than your own. The stone has been worn down by years of careful use, its edges rounded like a river pebble. You imagine Matthew holding it in the same way, his thumb pressed into the same slight depression on its surface. Somehow, this makes the work feel both older and newer at once. Next, you trim one of Matthew's old quills, turning the knife in your hand until the feather takes shape. The blade is sharper than you expected, sharper, even, than your own. You test the cut, examining the edge. It produces a clean, narrow line, a line that will give your script a slightly different character. Not better, not worse, simply different. You take a breath, grounding yourself in the familiar rhythm, and begin copying the final passage. The commentator's argument concludes with a reflection on understanding how humans seek meaning through structure and interpretation, and how the written word allows thoughts to travel across generations. You trace each sentence carefully, ensuring that every letter is shaped with precision. You feel the passage resonate with you more deeply today, perhaps because you have recently begun to reflect on your own place in this long tradition. As you write, the sun rises slowly behind a veil of thin clouds, casting a cool, milky light. The scriptorium fills with the faint hum of whispered movement, the shuffle of robes, the creak of wooden desks, the soft scratch of quills across parchment. It is the sound of dozens of hands working in silent unison, preserving knowledge one letter at a time. A younger novice, Brother Thomas, sits across the room from you. He watches your work from a distance, occasionally glancing down at his own page, with uncertainty. His script is still uneven, wavering left and right despite the ruled lines beneath it. You remember your own early attempts and the quiet frustration that came with them. Without speaking, you nod gently toward him, offering silent encouragement. He nods back, straightens his posture, and continues. Around midday, Brother Aldred stops by your desk again. He examines the page you are working on, his eyes scanning each line with the practiced precision of someone who has spent a lifetime among manuscripts. That quill once belonged to Mathieu, he observes quietly. You nod. He would have been pleased to see it in use again, Aldred adds. Tools, like words, prefer purpose over rest. There is a softness in his tone as he speaks, a reverence not just for Mathieu but for the work itself. You sense that he, too, carries the memory of the former scribe in the same way you now carry the margin note. You continue working until the bell rings for the midday meal. Bread, pottage, a small portion of cheese. Nothing unusual, nothing remarkable. The rhythm of meals is as predictable as the rhythm of writing. In a monastery, simplicity becomes its own kind of nourishment. When you return to the scriptorium, the final page is waiting for you. Only a few lines remain. You sit down, dip Matthew's quill into the ink, and choose your strokes carefully. Each letter feels like a quiet farewell, not to the work itself, but to the small questions and reflections that have accompanied you through it. The final sentence forms slowly, each curve deliberate, each serif precise. As the ink settles into the parchment, you place the quill aside, letting out a long breath. You have completed the manuscript. The sensation is not triumphant, nor is it solemn. It is quiet, like the closing of a door that has been gently held, ajar. You straighten the page and compare it to the one before it, checking the alignment, the margins, the consistency of the script. Everything is as it should be. The next step is to prepare the final colophon, a short note at the end of the manuscript. Some scribes include their name, though many do not. Some include a prayer or a message to encourage future readers. You think of Matthew, of his reflection in the wooden box, and you feel compelled to write something simple and honest. You pick up the quill one last time and write in small, unembellished letters, copied with care, in hope that understanding may follow. It is not a signature, it is not a question, it is a quiet acknowledgement of the purpose behind your work. You allow yourself a small moment of satisfaction. When you rise from your desk, the wooden board creaks, and you stretch your stiff back, feeling the familiar pull of muscles conditioned by long days of stillness. Brother Aldred helps you place the completed manuscript on a shelf to dry. It will later be bound, gilded, and wrapped in leather, though that process may take months. For now, it rests like a seed, waiting to take root in the monastery's library. As the afternoon drifts into evening, you find yourself lingering in the scriptorium. You open Matthew's wooden box once more, touching the smooth surface of the vellum note. You read it again, silently. To copy a text is to trust its author. To question a text is to trust its purpose. You wonder how many scribes felt the same way. Scribes whose names never made it beyond the margins, whose handwriting lived on in books, but whose thoughts remained unspoken. You wonder how many quiet questions have shaped the texts that scholars now treat as authoritative. As you leave the scriptorium, the monastery is settling into its evening rhythm. The bells ring for vespers. The shadows stretch long across the courtyard. A cool wind rustles through the herb garden, carrying the scent of sage and mint. You walk slowly, letting the quiet settle around you. You realize that you do not need to know the full truth behind Matthew's question. You do not need to know whether he doubted the text or simply wished to remember to revisit it. What matters is that he allowed the question to exist, that he understood the written word not as a static authority, but as a living thread woven by human hands. You think about the next scribe who may someday copy your manuscript, someone you will never meet. Perhaps they will see your colophon and wonder who wrote it. Perhaps they will imagine your life, your hands, your quiet days spent among parchment and ink. Or perhaps they will focus only on the text itself, and your small contribution will drift unnoticed into the long river of anonymous scribal labor. Both outcomes are acceptable, for in the end, the work you have done is not about recognition. It is about the quiet resilience of preserving knowledge, the steady, faithful act of carrying words across time. As the sun disappears beyond the cloister walls, you pause at the threshold of the scriptorium and take one last look inside. The desks, the tools, the candles, the manuscripts, in progress, they all stand silently, waiting for the next day's labor. You close the door gently. In that moment, you realize that the true legacy of a scribe is not found in the pages they write, but in the spaces between them, in the questions they leave unasked, the doubts they carry silently, and the small, steady acts of preservation that shape the world far beyond their own. And as you walk away, one quiet question follows you, softly and persistently. If truth itself must be copied by human hands, how much of it remains unchanged by the time those hands let it go? You arrive at the edge of a small medieval village, just as the first light of dawn brushes over the thatched roofs and the slow-moving river. There is a watermill here, an unassuming structure of timber and stone, yet its presence shapes nearly every life in the surrounding hamlet. To most visitors, it might appear ordinary, an old building with a wheel and a chute. But to those who live nearby, it is the quiet heart of their existence. Its wheel turns ceaselessly, grinding grain into flour that sustains households for miles around. The miller is already awake, though you have not yet seen him. He moves through the wooden planks with a practiced ease, boots striking the floor with a muted thud. The smell of damp wood, wet stone, and grain dust hangs in the air. Even before sunrise, the mill operates almost without pause. Nights are brief, but there is always work to be done. Grain will not wait for a convenient hour. Bread must be produced, and bread is life itself. You watch the river carefully. Its flow is steady, dependable, and yet never exactly the same. The water rushes against the wheel, turning it slowly at first, then faster as the current strengthens. The wheel is large, perhaps 20 feet in diameter, made from oak logs shaped and bound together by iron bands. Each rotation grinds the millstones inside, an unseen but vital motion. Below the wheel, water splashes rhythmically, spilling over the wheel's paddles and carrying away the spent energy. It is the most mundane of miracles, turning water into motion, motion into flour, and flour into survival. The miller emerges from the building at last, wearing a tunic darkened by years of labor and a cap pulled low over his forehead. His hands are strong and calloused, his forearms covered in fine scratches and splinters. He greets no one, for greetings are unnecessary here. The river, the wheel, and the stones are his companions. Inside, the mill smells of raw grain and stone dust. You follow him cautiously, noticing the grooves in the floor worn by countless footsteps over decades. Grain sacks are stacked against the walls, some filled to bursting, others partially emptied. The millstones stand at the center, two massive discs, one stationary and one rotating. The rotation is powered entirely by the wheel outside, yet the motion must be regulated by human hands. Too fast, and the flour becomes too fine, almost powdery, and risks spoiling. Too slow, and the villagers go hungry. The miller measures out grain with careful attention, pouring it into the hopper. You watch the funnel guide the kernels between the stones, where they are crushed and ground into flour. The sound is constant, a low grinding, deep and rhythmic. It is monotonous, hypnotic, and strangely comforting. The kind of sound that could lull you into both alertness and reverie at the same time. You notice how the miller checks the texture of the flour. He pinches it between his fingers, feeling the granules shift and sift. He adjusts the upper stone, raising it slightly to produce a coarser meal for one batch, lowering it to create fine flour for another. Every movement is small, almost imperceptible, but each has significant consequences. A poorly adjusted millstone can ruin a week's supply of flour, leaving families hungry or forcing them to eat coarse, bitter bread for days. Outside, the river continues to turn the wheel, day after day. Its motion is a constant, almost unremarkable, yet it underpins the rhythm of village life. Children run along the riverbank, dipping their hands into the water and splashing cautiously near the mill race. Women gather nearby, carrying baskets to collect flour and transport it to their kitchens. Each interaction is brief, practical, almost ceremonial in its simplicity. The mill is the center of the economy and the culture of this small place, yet it rarely draws attention to itself. The miller does not speak much, but when he does, his words are simple and direct. He instructs apprentices, corrects measurements, or answers questions from villagers. Each word is deliberate, chosen to communicate only what is necessary. The spoken language mirrors the work itself, precise, efficient, and measured. Apprenticeships are long and quiet. You notice a young boy beside the miller, observing each movement carefully. He does not touch the equipment yet. His role is to watch, to understand the subtle sounds and motions that indicate when the machinery functions properly. The wheel, the stones, the grain each produces its own tone. A sullen groan in the wooden frame, a rough scraping of stones, or a sudden clatter indicates a problem. The boy must learn to recognize these signs before he is allowed to operate the mill independently. Mastery requires patience, observation, and a willingness to endure monotony without complaint. Meals in the mill are brief and practical. The miller eats bread and cheese with water, sometimes porridge if he is lucky. There is little room for indulgence when the work is constant. The watermill is never truly idle, not even during meals. You notice that one of the apprentices checks the stones mid-bite, ensuring they continue to rotate evenly. Even a brief lapse in attention could disrupt the flow of flour. And in a village dependent on bread for survival, errors are costly. You begin to understand the extraordinary patience required for this life. The work is repetitive, nearly hypnotic. Hours pass in a blur of stone, water, and grain, each movement carefully controlled. There is no excitement here, no battle, no sudden danger. And yet, the miller and his apprentices are engaged in a form of survival that is quiet but essential. Their labor sustains life in ways no one outside the village may notice. And without it, the village itself would falter. As the day progresses, the river changes subtly. A downstream obstruction shifts the current, slowing the wheel slightly. The miller notices immediately. He adjusts the sluice gates, directing more water to the wheel, increasing its speed. Small levers and wedges shift with precise motions, fine-tuning the power. The mill is alive, responsive, and yet entirely dependent on human understanding. Without careful attention, the water itself can become destructive, flooding the mill or breaking the machinery. You follow his movements, noting how each adjustment affects the grind. The apprentices watch closely, learning that even the quietest changes matter. The lesson is not dramatic, but crucial. Survival depends on understanding small details, anticipating consequences, and responding with patience. The work is humbling. It teaches endurance, observation, and respect for forces beyond human control. Evening begins to fall. The light fades, leaving the mill in deep shadow, lit only by flickering torches along the walls. The wheel slows slightly as the river's flow decreases, though the sound of grinding persists. The miller and his apprentices complete their final rounds, checking stones, emptying hoppers, and securing grain sacks. Every motion is deliberate, the culmination of a day spent immersed in repetition and quiet diligence. As you step outside, the village feels different than when you arrived. The mill is ordinary, yet you have observed the extraordinary patience that sustains it. The turning wheel, the grinding stones, and the flow of water are not just mechanisms, they are the backbone of village life, sustaining the rhythms of people whose names may never be recorded in chronicles or songs. You walk along the riverbank, listening to the last sound of water against the wheel. Children are gathering for the evening meal. Mothers call them home. And the sky darkens with soft streaks of orange and violet. The mill stands silently, almost invisible, yet it has shaped the day for everyone nearby. Without it, bread would be scarce, work would falter, and hunger would spread. Its presence is mundane, but its impact is profound. You linger for a while, contemplating the quiet labor that underpins human survival. In this life, drama is not always found in battles, kings, or revolutions. Sometimes it exists in the patient repetition of a wheel turning, a stone grinding, and hands that measure, adjust, and endure. It is a kind of invisible heroism, unnoticed by those who benefit most from it. And yet, as night fully descends, a thought nags at you. The wheel will keep turning tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. How many days, months, or years have passed in this same rhythm? How many generations have depended on the steady motion of this one unassuming mill? And what secrets lie buried in the quiet, unrecorded details of lives shaped by the flow of grain, water, and patient labor. You leave the river behind and walk toward the village, the distant sound of the wheel fading into the evening. The villagers will rise again tomorrow, and so will the mill. The work continues, unnoticed, uncelebrated, yet utterly essential. And as you close your eyes that night, the last thought that lingers is simple, yet profound. How many unnoticed acts of quiet endurance have shaped the survival of humanity, just as a watermill shapes the lives of an entire village? The next morning, the river moves in a gentler rhythm than yesterday, curling lazily around the banks, reflecting the pale light of early dawn. Mist rises from the surface, softening the outline of the wheel and cloaking the mill in a haze that makes it seem older than it is timeless. Part of the landscape itself. You approach the building once more, stepping carefully over the uneven stones of the mill race, aware that each step has been repeated countless times by the miller, apprentices, and villagers over decades. Here, you are not just observing labor. You are entering a world governed by rhythm and small, precise motions, each of which carries significance far beyond its apparent simplicity. Inside, the miller is already at work. He moves silently, but with a purposeful cadence, adjusting the sluice gates to maximize the flow of water into the wheel. The wheel begins to turn more steadily, paddles slicing the current with the same unwavering regularity as they have for generations. The millstones shift and settle into motion, the sound of grinding grain filling the building like a low, persistent heartbeat. It is a noise that can become nearly meditative, an endless reminder that work is continuity, and continuity is survival. Today, you notice more clearly the miller's system of managing the grain. Sacks are stacked meticulously along the walls, organized by type: wheat, barley, rye, and oats, each batch marked with a small tag. These tags are simple scraps of parchment, but they hold vital information. The farmer who delivered the grain, the date of delivery, and the expected output in flour. Mistakes could be disastrous. A mislabeled sack could mean a family receives the wrong kind of flour, or worse, stale or spoiled grain ends up mixed with fresh. For the miller, attention to detail is not optional. It is the invisible foundation upon which the entire village depends. You watch as an apprentice, a thin boy with bright eyes and calloused fingers, carries a sack of wheat to the hopper. He struggles slightly under its weight, and you can see the tension in his shoulders as he steadies himself. The miller does not rush him. Instead, he observes quietly, waiting for the boy to adjust and find balance. Once the sack is placed correctly, the boy tips the grain into the hopper, and the stones begin to chew through it, turning kernels into fine flour that spills into waiting troughs. The miller inspects the initial output, pressing the flour between his fingers to ensure consistency. The apprentice watches closely, absorbing every nuance of judgment, every subtle adjustment, and every flick of the wrist or turn of a lever. You notice the complex choreography required to maintain efficiency. The wheel must not be overpowered by excess grain. The stones must not grind too slowly. Spouts, chutes, and hoppers must be managed so that flour flows without clogging or wasting. Every lever and wedge, every sluice and paddle is part of an interconnected system. The mill is not merely a building. It is an ecosystem of human effort, machinery, and natural forces, all working in delicate balance. One misstep could disrupt the harmony, and the consequences ripple far beyond the walls of the mill. While the work continues, you begin to understand the unique form of education this environment provides. The apprentice learns by observation, repetition, and correction. He studies the grain, feeling its weight, listening to the grinding sound, watching the flow of water, and understanding the subtle signs that indicate when adjustments are needed. Unlike lessons in a classroom, where mistakes are often theoretical, here every misjudgment carries immediate consequences. He is learning not just a skill, but responsibility itself, how to act within a system that sustains life. Lunch comes quietly. The miller eats bread and a piece of cheese at a small wooden table, still near the milling stones, still within earshot of the wheel. There is little talk, for words are unnecessary. The rhythm of work continues even as hands are briefly still. You notice that flour dust clings to the sleeves of everyone present, coating the table and floor in a thin, white layer. It is omnipresent, yet it does not hinder work. It is simply part of the environment. You begin to sense how humans and machinery have learned to coexist, how adaptation has allowed this humble building to function continuously for decades. As afternoon arrives, the miller turns his attention to the downstream sluices. He inspects the flow of water, checking for debris or obstructions that could slow the wheel. A branch has lodged itself against a paddle, and he motions to the apprentice to remove it carefully. The boy climbs cautiously onto the wet planks, hands gripping the timber for balance. The branch is lifted, the wheel resumes its steady rotation, and the lesson is absorbed without words. You realize that much of the miller's teaching is silent. Observation, intuition, and repeated exposure are the instruments of knowledge here, far more than spoken instructions. You spend a long moment watching the water cascade over the wheel. It is mesmerizing in its constancy. The river's flow, though unremarkable to anyone passing by, is fundamental. Without it, the mill is inert, and the village is at risk. You begin to see the deep interdependence between human labor and natural forces. The miller does not simply operate the wheel. He negotiates with the river, interprets its moods, and ensures it performs reliably. Nature is neither hostile nor benevolent. It is simply a system with which he must cooperate, day after day, season after season. The afternoon wears on, and the process repeats endlessly. Grain is brought in, measured, poured, and ground. Flour is collected, bagged, and labeled. Each step seems minor, almost banal, yet each is crucial to sustaining life in the village. You understand that the quiet labor of the miller is inseparable from the quiet survival of the community. There is no glamour in this work, no grand battles, no proclamations of heroism, yet it is every bit as vital as the endeavors chronicled in the histories of kings and conquests. A subtle change occurs as dusk approaches. The river slows, the light softens, and the air cools. The miller calls the apprentice to help secure the sacks of flour. They are stacked neatly along the walls, ready to be transported to village households the next day. Each sack is examined, pressed to remove air, and tied securely. The miller checks for leaks, tears, or mislabeling. Every detail matters, for a single oversight could ripple outward, affecting families' meals, the baker's supply, and ultimately, the entire local economy. In these small actions, the unseen threads of human survival are reinforced, quietly but decisively. Night begins to fall. The wheel turns more slowly as the river ebbs, and torches are lit to provide light inside the mill. The grinding sound becomes a softer, slower murmur. The miller and apprentice conduct one final inspection of the stones, hoppers, and chutes. Grain is secured, tools are cleaned, and the building is prepared for the night. Tomorrow, the cycle will begin again, unchanged and uninterrupted. You step outside and watch the village from the edge of the river. The watermill stands in the fading light, ordinary and unremarkable in appearance, yet essential. Its operation sustains life quietly, invisibly, and reliably. You are struck by how much of human existence depends on such monotonous, patient, and precise labor acts that rarely enter the annals of history, but whose absence would be catastrophic. You notice a few villagers walking home with lanterns, carrying small sacks of flour. Children scurry ahead, laughing softly, their energy undiminished by the long day. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks, and the smell of hearth fires drifts through the air. The watermill, ever turning, remains at the center of it all, a silent, persistent heartbeat in the rhythm of human life. You think about the generations of millers before this one, whose hands shaped the same stones, adjusted the same sluices, and learned the same lessons through quiet observation. You imagine their lives, the patience, the endurance, the subtle expertise required to maintain the machinery, the grain, and the fragile balance of survival. None of their names may have survived in written chronicles, yet their labor forms the foundation of the village's existence. It is remarkable in its ordinariness, heroic in its quiet steadfastness. And as you leave the mill for the night, you cannot help but wonder, how many unnoticed hands have ensured survival throughout history, quietly shaping the lives of countless others, while the world beyond celebrated only kings, wars, and grand achievements. The wheel will turn again tomorrow, the stones will grind, and life, ordinary yet vital, will continue in its steady, relentless rhythm. The next morning arrives slowly, the sky a pale wash of pink and grey, the river stretching in soft curves toward the distant hills. The watermill waits as it always does, half shadowed in mist, the wheel slowly turning in anticipation of another day of work. You feel the familiar pull of quiet observation, the desire to understand not the grand narratives of history, but the small, steady labours that sustain life. This is a world that rarely makes it into chronicles or annals. It is a world of grain, stones, water, and hands, hardened by repetition. Inside the mill, the miller moves with his usual calm precision, inspecting the sluices, checking the wheel, and ensuring that the paddles are free from debris. The apprentice follows close behind, his hands twitching slightly in anticipation of tasks yet to be performed. You notice the subtle authority in the miller's movements, each gesture economical, each motion purposeful. This is a man who has learned over decades to harmonize with both machinery and nature, to act with foresight, and to respond to problems before they become crises. Today, you are allowed to assist in a small way, lifting the sack of grain into the hopper. It is heavier than it looks, and your hands ache from the effort. The miller watches, offering a single word of instruction when necessary. Shift it slightly. There, steady now. The grain pours between the stones with a low rumble, transforming from kernels into flour. The sound is constant, hypnotic, and strangely reassuring. You realize that the rhythm of this labor, so monotonous and unremarkable, is itself a kind of knowledge, a quiet pulse that governs the daily life of the village. You study the apprentice as he works. He no longer merely watches. He now anticipates the miller's movements. When the wheel slows slightly, he adjusts the sluice with a practiced hand. When the stones begin to produce overly fine flour, he nudges the upper stone with a subtle twist. There is an elegance in his obedience and a discipline in his observation. He is learning patience, precision, and the immense responsibility that comes with sustaining others through silent, repetitive labor. The miller pauses briefly to taste the flour, pressing it between his fingers, inhaling the faint scent of freshly ground grain. He nods, satisfied. Every batch is checked, every sack measured and labeled meticulously. You realize that in this world, mistakes are not simply inconvenient. They can have tangible consequences for the survival and health of entire families. Flour that is too coarse or too fine, stale or contaminated, can disrupt daily life. The miller's work is quiet, steady, and immensely consequential. By midday, villagers begin to arrive. Farmers bring their harvests, children run along the riverbank, and women carry baskets to collect freshly ground flour. The mill becomes a hub of quiet activity. Though there is no clamor, no excessive talk, interactions are brief, functional, and entirely rooted in practicality. Payment is given in coin or kind, and goods are exchanged efficiently. You notice that much of the village's social and economic life revolves around this one building. Without the mill, the community would falter. With it, life continues, reliable and predictable. As the afternoon unfolds, you observe the small crises that demand immediate attention. A wheel paddle has begun to splinter. A hopper is clogged with a kernel lodged between the stones. A sack has a tear, threatening to spill flour across the floor. Each issue is addressed calmly, methodically, without dramatics. The miller handles problems as they arise, guiding the apprentice to correct them. You are struck by how these seemingly minor details require both expertise and constant vigilance. The miller is not merely performing physical labor. He is orchestrating a delicate balance of forces, human, mechanical, and natural, that sustain life in the village. By late afternoon, the sun begins to dip, casting long shadows across the watermill's wooden beams. You see the apprentice now operating the sluice gates with confidence, adjusting the flow of water to keep the wheel turning steadily. The miller stands back, his hands folded, watching without intervening. It is a subtle lesson in trust and responsibility. Knowledge is not only acquired by observation, but by being allowed to act within limits, to take ownership of the machinery and its consequences. This is how skills endure across generations, quietly and without fanfare. Evening arrives, and the village's rhythms begin to shift. Villagers carry their sacks of flour home, children chase each other along the riverbank, and smoke rises from hearth fires. The mill slows naturally as the river's current weakens. Torches are lit inside, providing a warm glow to replace fading sunlight. The miller and apprentice conduct their final inspections, ensuring that the machinery is secure and ready to resume its relentless cycle in the morning. Every lever, wedge, and plank is checked. Every sack of flour is sealed. Every tool is cleaned and stored. The day's labor concludes, yet the mill itself will never truly rest. Even overnight, the stones will continue to rotate slowly if the river permits, grinding grain for early risers before dawn. You step outside for a moment, inhaling the crisp evening air. The watermill stands in quiet dignity, unremarkable to any casual observer, yet essential to life itself. Its presence is like the heartbeat of the village, constant, reliable, unnoticed, except when it falters. You reflect on the generations of hands, millers, apprentices, and villagers who have contributed to this simple ecosystem of survival. Their names may be lost to history, but their work continues, shaping life in ways no chronicler could capture. As night deepens, you wander along the riverbank, listening to the water lapping against the wheel, the faint clatter of stones, and the occasional murmur of an animal in the fields. It is easy to forget that human life depends on this quiet, persistent labor. Yet it is undeniable. The village survives, endures, and thrives because of small, repetitive acts of care, attention, and responsibility. Bread is produced, families are fed, life continues. You consider the larger implications of what you have witnessed. Outside this village, history remembers kings, battles, treaties, and grand events. Yet it is in places like this watermill, the quiet corners of human endeavor, that the majority of people's lives have been sustained. Without these invisible structures of labor, the grand events of history would be meaningless, for there would be no one to witness, record, or survive them. Ordinary acts, repeated day after day, carry a weight far greater than the drama of courts and battlefields. The apprentice sits quietly nearby, polishing a tool, his movements precise and steady. He will become the next miller one day, inheriting not just the machinery, but the responsibility, knowledge, and patience required to maintain life. You realize that this cycle of teaching, observing, practicing, and passing on expertise is as old as the mill itself. Knowledge endures quietly, preserved in the rhythm of labor rather than in chronicles or epics. As you finally leave the mill for the night, the wheel continues to turn, slower now, but unyielding. The sound follows you as you walk toward the village, a low, constant murmur, reminding you of the invisible infrastructure that sustains human life. You feel a subtle sense of awe, not for spectacle, not for grandeur, but for the quiet, uncelebrated persistence of ordinary labor. The watermill will turn again tomorrow, and the work will continue, as it has for generations. And as darkness settles fully over the village, you carry with you a thought that lingers quietly, but insistently. Perhaps the true architects of human survival are not kings, generals, or famous chroniclers, but the hands that grind the grain, maintain the wheel, and endure the monotony, ensuring that life itself continues day by day. The mill stands silently in the night, its wheel turning like a heartbeat, and you understand, finally, that its legacy, though invisible to most, is profound, unbroken, and eternal. You arrive at the village as a soft grey mist drifts over the cobblestones. The houses are small, tightly clustered, and mostly silent. Windows are shuttered, doors closed. The smell of smoke from hearth fires hangs faintly in the cool morning air, though it is not warm enough yet to disperse the chill. There are no children running along the paths, no vendors calling out to passers-by. Even the river seems muted, its usual playful gurgle softened into a slow, reluctant murmur. Something has changed, and you sense it immediately. The village is holding its breath. The Black Plague has arrived here in fragments, creeping along trade routes, carried on carts, in travellers' coats, and through the movements of rats and fleas that nobody notices until it is too late. No one in this village knows exactly who brought it, and the authorities provide little guidance. There are whispered warnings in other towns: isolation, quarantine, prayer, but nothing concrete. Fear has settled into the bones of the villagers, as completely as the frost that lingers on the rooftops each morning. You step carefully through the empty streets. Doors are locked, but signs of habitation are everywhere. A broom leaning against a wall, a basket of herbs drying in the sun, a single shoe abandoned on a doorstep. These traces suggest lives interrupted, suspended mid-activity. It is as if the village itself has paused, waiting for a verdict it cannot understand. The market square, normally bustling with the aroma of bread, salted meat, and fresh vegetables, is silent. Stalls remain erected, but the produce has wilted in the cool, misty air. A few chickens wander aimlessly in the corners, ignored. You notice a scarecrow, fashioned from old rags, and a carved pumpkin head, standing as a lonely sentinel over the square. It is not there to frighten birds, there are hardly any, but as a symbol, perhaps, of protection against unseen forces. Superstition and necessity mingle seamlessly in these moments of anxiety. As you move toward the village well, the stillness is broken only by the faint creak of the pulley and the distant call of a bird. No one is at the well. Normally, it would be a place of gossip and community. Now, it is abandoned. You peer into the dark water, noting its smooth surface and the thin layer of mist hovering above. In its reflection, the grey sky is mirrored, adding to the sense of unreality that has settled over the village. Water, normally life-giving, now seems almost indifferent. You make your way past houses and cottages, each one showing evidence of sudden absence. A pot left on the fire, still warm but long abandoned. A child's toy left on a doorstep. A chair tipped over in haste. It is as if the villagers vanished mid-motion, pulled away by fear or by fate. The absence of noise is almost palpable. Where once there were hundreds of interactions each day, there is now only the muted whisper of wind and distant river. Inside one house, you notice faint marks in the dust on a table, perhaps attempts to write messages, notes for neighbors, or prayers left for unseen forces. Some notes are just lines scratched in panic, others carefully inscribed in ink. Prayers for protection, petitions for mercy, instructions for relatives should death come. Every mark speaks of uncertainty, resilience, and the human desire to exert control in circumstances entirely beyond comprehension. You wander into a small chapel at the edge of the village. Its doors creak as you push them open. Inside, pews remain upright, candles melted unevenly from previous services. There is a faint smell of incense and wax. On the altar, a single open book lies face down, its pages ruffled and soiled. Perhaps it was left in a hurry. The bell above the chapel tower, normally tolling daily to mark the hours, hangs silent. Even here, time itself seems suspended. A lone figure approaches from the shadows. An old woman, hunched with age, and carrying a bundle of herbs. She keeps her distance, eyes cautious, voice a whisper. "They say it spreads through the air," she mutters, though her tone is uncertain. Some say it comes only from the dead. Others say it rides on rats. Nobody knows. We lock the doors and pray. Her words trail off into silence. Fear is palpable in every gesture, the tightening of her shoulders, the careful avoidance of contact, the tremor in her hands as she holds her bundle close. You notice the signs posted on doors. Crude symbols marking houses where illness has struck. Warnings to others not to enter. The village attempts to enforce a kind of isolation, though it is partial and imperfect. Neighbors cannot care for each other fully. The sick are left to their own devices or confined to beds in empty rooms. Every precaution is small, inadequate, and yet necessary. Even in despair, the villagers attempt to exert agency over the invisible threat. The plague does not strike evenly. Some houses remain untouched, others are completely abandoned. You notice subtle differences in how people reacted before leaving. Some carried only essentials, others hurriedly packed personal belongings. Some left messages for friends and relatives, others left nothing. Patterns emerge not from deliberate planning, but from instinct and human habit. The village is now a patchwork of isolation, a geography of fear and survival. You wander toward the edge of the settlement, where a field of wheat sways faintly in the morning breeze. The crops continue to grow, indifferent to the turmoil among humans. Farmers have abandoned some fields entirely, leaving them to the wind and sun. Yet, life persists here, even in the absence of human care. Nature, unlike humanity, seems impervious to panic, resilient in a way that is both comforting and unsettling. The juxtaposition of abandoned human life and persistent natural growth underscores the fragility of survival in this time. In the late afternoon, you sit on a fallen log at the edge of the forest that borders the village. The trees are silent, and the river reflects the fading light. You hear faint noises in the distance, perhaps animals reclaiming spaces once occupied by humans, perhaps the occasional villager returning for essentials. Everything is muted, subdued, slow. The plague enforces this rhythm. It is a pause in ordinary life, a forced meditation on mortality and contingency. You think about the villagers' routines before this crisis: tending to animals, baking bread, repairing thatched roofs, tending small gardens, carrying water, weaving cloth. Each task was mundane, repetitive, yet essential. Now, the absence of these tasks highlights their importance. Without small daily labors, survival becomes precarious, and the web of community unravels quickly. The plague does not merely kill bodies, it interrupts the network of human care that sustains life in even the smallest ways. Night falls, bringing a deep, quiet darkness. The village sleeps or hides in fear. Fires burn low, if at all. The wind carries distant sounds that might be footsteps, whispers, or nothing at all. Every creak of a shutter, every sigh of the trees, feels amplified in the unnatural silence. You notice the subtle signs of human adaptation. Doors barred with whatever materials were at hand, herbs hung in windows, notes pinned to walls. Even in despair, humans attempt to survive. Even in absence, they leave traces of life. You walk slowly along the empty street, noticing details that speak to the village's resilience. Footprints in the dirt where someone returned for supplies. A small cache of food hidden behind a cart. A candle burning in a high window to signal life. These traces reveal that survival is not passive. It requires observation, adaptation, and courage, even in the face of overwhelming uncertainty. As you prepare to leave, you glance back at the village, now bathed in pale moonlight. The streets are quiet, the houses dark, the river still. Yet life persists in the background. The animals, the plants, and the faint human signals of adaptation and resistance. You realize that even in the apparent stillness, the village is engaged in a struggle quiet, unobserved, yet persistent. Survival is an accumulation of small acts: locking a door, washing hands, moving quietly through space, leaving notes for those who might return. And as you walk away from the village, one question lingers, echoing in the stillness. In a world where death arrives without warning, how do ordinary people maintain the fragile rhythms of survival? And which of these small, unseen acts will endure beyond the silence? The morning mist lingers longer than usual, curling around the village houses and dampening the narrow streets. It is heavier now, carrying the faint metallic scent of damp earth mixed with wood smoke, a reminder of both life and decay. You walk cautiously among the cottages, noting the subtle changes since your last visit. Doors are sealed with crude wooden bars, windows are shuttered tight, and signs of hurried departure linger everywhere. A basket of laundry left on a doorstep is stiff with frost, and the faint aroma of stale bread suggests that someone may have returned briefly, only to leave again. The village is suspended in a tense, quiet limbo, every detail heavy with uncertainty. The villagers have begun to implement measures to protect themselves, imperfect as they are. Signs marked with chalk or paint declare, "Do not enter," or "Contagion." Here, crude but necessary attempts at public health. You notice that some of the houses feature small bundles of herbs, rosemary, sage, and thyme hanging near doors and windows. The scent is faint, almost imperceptible, yet meant to ward off evil spirits and disease. It is a mixture of superstition and survival instinct, a reflection of the limited understanding of illness at the time. While modern medicine might scoff, in these circumstances, such rituals serve as comfort, a tangible method to assert control in a world otherwise dominated by fear. You pause at one house marked with a crude symbol indicating plague had struck. The door is locked, but a faint smoke curls from a chimney, suggesting that someone remains inside. Perhaps they are ill, or perhaps they are hiding, attempting to endure the sickness without external contact. You think about the daily calculations required in such a space. When to leave for essentials, when to remain hidden, when to risk exposure to the outside world. Each decision is minor in appearance, but carries profound consequences. Some villagers have retreated entirely indoors, leaving only the necessary supply runs to maintain survival. You observe the few brave souls walking quickly through the streets, baskets in hand, moving silently and deliberately, avoiding contact with neighbors. Their steps are measured, their glances cautious. Even movement has become a calculated risk. The natural flow of human interaction has been suspended, replaced with a disciplined system of avoidance. Survival has shifted from cooperation to careful, isolated calculation. Inside one cottage, you glimpse the interior through a cracked window. A woman is tending to a small fire, while an elderly relative lies on a narrow bed, shivering. She adjusts a bundle of herbs hanging near the fireplace, occasionally inhaling its scent. Her movements are precise, economical, and repetitive, a quiet choreography of care. Every gesture is survival in miniature, ensuring warmth, monitoring the ailing body, rationing food. There is no room for fatigue or distraction. Each action carries tangible consequences. The village's water supply is similarly regimented. The well, once a gathering place for social exchange, is now approached individually. Containers are lowered and raised quietly, as though even the sound of a bucket might attract disease. The rhythm of drawing water, washing hands, and disinfecting surfaces has replaced communal interaction. Ordinary activities that were once taken for granted now require planning, precision, and constant vigilance. Outside the houses, you notice the fields. Some are left untended, wheat bending under frost and wind, vegetables rotting slowly in the cold. Yet other plots bear the careful attention of villagers who continue to maintain food supplies despite fear. It is a delicate balance, the need to cultivate sustenance while avoiding exposure. These acts, unremarkable on the surface, are fundamental to survival. They demonstrate an extraordinary resilience, quiet, unseen, and essential. The psychological burden is palpable. Even children, though fewer and quieter, sense the change in rhythm. They do not play freely. They move with caution, sometimes following adults like shadows. Curiosity is tempered by fear, instinct muted by observation. You notice a small girl tracing her finger along a line of frost on a window pane, absent-minded yet aware of the larger cautionary patterns around her. The village is a school of survival, teaching even the youngest inhabitants how to navigate danger. You are drawn to the village chapel again, whose doors are half closed. Inside, The air is thick with incense and the faint mustiness of long unused benches. The altar remains decorated, though slightly disheveled. Candles have burned low, some extinguished entirely. Prayer has become a form of daily endurance, a small ritual to impose order on the chaos. Here, spiritual survival parallels physical survival, offering a structured rhythm to counter the randomness of death. People leave offerings, small notes, and petitions for protection. Faith becomes a scaffolding, fragile but necessary, for human endurance. As afternoon approaches, the patterns of adaptation become more apparent. Food is rationed meticulously. Each household calculates carefully how long supplies will last. When one family runs low, a neighbor may leave provisions at a doorstep, using a stick or rope to avoid contact. Transactions are minimal, deliberate, and ritualized. Every movement is evaluated for risk, every decision weighed against potential consequences. In this context, mundane acts, cooking, carrying water, maintaining warmth, become acts of strategic planning, essential to life itself. You note the emergence of unspoken hierarchies and responsibilities. Some villagers, by age, health, or experience, take on supervisory roles, coordinating supply runs, or distributing essential goods. Others, weaker or more vulnerable, must follow instructions carefully, relying on observation and compliance to survive. The social fabric has shifted, flattened in some ways by isolation, yet intensified in others by necessity. Every act, however small, is part of a survival strategy that extends beyond the individual to the household, the street, and the village. Even as night falls, vigilance continues. Fires burn low for warmth and safety. Torches illuminate thresholds for necessary movement, and windows remain shuttered. You hear occasional coughs or the faint shuffle of a solitary figure, each sound amplified in the unnatural quiet. Sleep is guarded, intermittent, interrupted by concern for the sick or the fragile stability of daily routines. The village rests, but only lightly. Consciousness remains tethered to survival. You consider the long-term effects of this isolation and caution. Daily routines, once mundane and repetitive, have become critical training in risk management, endurance, and observation. Villagers must adapt to maintain life in an environment where the smallest error may be fatal. Skills once peripheral attention to hygiene, careful rationing, measured movement, now dictate the difference between life and death. Even in fear, ordinary human ingenuity and persistence remain evident. As you leave the village streets under a sky darkened by clouds, the landscape feels both desolate and deeply human. The houses, shuttered and silent, tell stories of vigilance, care. The fields, half-tended, whisper of continued effort despite peril. The river flows quietly, indifferent yet essential, much like the unseen forces shaping daily survival. You realize that history is not solely made by grand events. It is also sustained by the unnoticed, patient strategies that allow ordinary people to endure catastrophe. And as you reflect on the quiet determination around you, one unsettling thought arises. When an entire community adapts to survive an invisible threat, how much of their collective wisdom, caution, and endurance will be remembered, and how much will vanish, leaving only the shadow of ordinary resilience in the historical record? The first light of dawn cuts through a thinning mist, revealing streets that are still empty, but no longer entirely abandoned. You approach the village cautiously, noticing subtle changes. A door left slightly ajar, a patch of tilled soil in one field, smoke curling from several chimneys. The Black Plague has begun to retreat. Or perhaps the survivors have simply emerged to reclaim what they can. Either way, life returns, not with grand gestures, but in small, careful movements. The market square, once eerily quiet, shows signs of gradual reoccupation. A woman arranges wilted vegetables on a wooden stall. Children follow her cautiously, balancing baskets on their heads, practicing steps that were once second nature but now require deliberate care. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and baking bread. It is faintly cheerful, yet tempered by the knowledge of what has passed. The rhythm of daily life resumes slowly, unevenly, and carefully, like a river carving its way around obstacles. You follow a narrow street, observing households reopening their doors. Inside one home, a man sweeps the floor of accumulated dust, pausing occasionally to inspect corners where rodents may have nested. A small girl stirs porridge, feeding it to a cat that has survived the weeks of isolation. These ordinary acts, the sweeping, the cooking, the tending of animals, carry newfound significance. They are not merely domestic chores. They are exercises in recovery, small gestures that rebuild the fragile infrastructure of life, disrupted by weeks of fear and sickness. Outside the homes, fields show both neglect and perseverance. Some plots of wheat have been left wild, bending under frost and wind. Others have been carefully attended, tilled anew, and sown with seeds retrieved from storage. Farmers move deliberately, aware that mistakes could risk the survival of their households, and possibly the village itself. It is a subtle yet profound lesson in the enduring interplay between human labor and nature. Life continues, not because danger has fully passed, but because people have learned to navigate it with care, patience, and cautious optimism. The river itself feels different today. The wheel of the old watermill, which had slowed during the height of fear and isolation, now turns more freely, the water's energy harnessed efficiently once more. The miller and his apprentice, if they have survived, have likely returned to their posts. You imagine the small but vital tasks being resumed, measuring grain, adjusting stones, and monitoring the flow of water. The quiet labor of the mill, previously a constant background hum, now carries a deeper resonance. Each rotation of the wheel is a testament to continuity, resilience, and the survival of ordinary life. You notice the subtle ways in which the villagers' behaviors have changed. Touching objects is cautious, greetings are deliberate, and movement through spaces once taken for granted is now measured. Small rituals, washing hands before handling food, leaving herbs near doorways, observing patterns in neighbors' comings and goings, have become integrated into daily routines. These adaptations, born of necessity, have subtly reshaped the culture of the village. Fear has not vanished entirely. It has been internalized, codified into habits that persist alongside the slow return of normalcy. Inside the chapel, candles flicker against the walls, their light casting gentle shadows. The altar is cleaned, and prayer resumes not as a panicked reaction, but as a deliberate daily rhythm. The community gathers in cautious proximity, whispering prayers for those lost and thanks for those who survived. The chapel, like the village itself, has endured the quiet devastation of absence and now serves as a focal point for reflection and recovery. Spiritual practices, like daily labor, have proven essential to sustaining morale, offering structure in a world that once seemed chaotic. In one corner of the village, you encounter a group of survivors repairing a broken cart. Their movements are unhurried but precise. Each action is deliberate. A wheel secured with rope, a plank replaced with care, a load balanced for safety. Their work is neither heroic nor dramatic, yet it carries immense practical significance. Every repair, every adjustment, every precaution is a small reclaiming of life from the disruption caused by the plague. Ordinary labor becomes extraordinary through the lens of survival. You pause to observe a family returning to a partially abandoned house. They enter slowly, checking floors, walls, and furniture. Every corner is scrutinized, every surface touched with care. In doing so, they are not merely reclaiming property, they are restoring the structure of their daily lives. The act of returning becomes an exercise in endurance, in observation, and in quiet courage. The past weeks have transformed ordinary spaces into landscapes of vigilance, and reoccupation requires both memory and prudence. Children, once hidden indoors, emerge cautiously to explore the open streets. They run, laugh, and play, yet their movements are measured. Lessons learned from absence, fear, observation, patience remain embedded in their behaviors. You notice how even play has been tempered by experience, how curiosity is balanced with caution. In the smallest details, the human spirit adapts to ensure continuity, blending resilience with the lessons of survival. As twilight approaches, the village settles into a rhythm of cautious normalcy. Fires burn steadily in hearths, and the river reflects the last light of the day as the watermill hums softly in the background. Villagers share stories, repair tools, and prepare meals, integrating routines that were disrupted into new, sustainable patterns. Life, while quieter than before, is undeniably returning. Yet the shadow of absence, the loss, the sickness, and the disruption lingers, a reminder of how fragile stability can be. You consider the larger significance of what has unfolded here. The Black Plague has erased ordinary patterns, reshaped relationships, and demanded adaptations that will endure long after the immediate threat has passed. Survival depended not on heroics, but on the accumulation of small, patient acts. Tending fields, monitoring neighbors, washing hands, adjusting the millstone, rationing food, and observing every subtle change in the environment. These ordinary measures, largely invisible in grand narratives, were crucial in sustaining life. And as night falls fully over the village, you step back and take in the quiet scene. The flicker of candlelight in windows, the glint of water in the slowly turning wheel, the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. You realize that the true measure of survival in this time is not recorded in chronicles or tales of conquest. It resides in the enduring acts of ordinary people, quietly rebuilding their lives, sustaining communities, and weaving the subtle threads of continuity that connect past to future. As you leave the village, one lingering question follows you, soft but persistent. In the aftermath of absence and fear, which ordinary acts of resilience will shape the future, and which will fade into silence, remembered only by those who live to tell the quiet story of survival? You arrive at the abbey just before the first light of dawn touches the slate roofs and stone walls. A hush blankets the courtyard, broken only by the soft rustle of wind through cypress trees and the distant gurgle of the abbey's stream. It is a place of quiet routine, a realm of structure and repetition that governs every life within its walls. Unlike the bustling village outside, this world is governed not by commerce or survival in the traditional sense, but by devotion, discipline, and an unyielding adherence to a prescribed rhythm of prayer and labor. The first sound that reaches you is the bell. Its peal echoes across the cloisters, resonant and deliberate. This is matins, the first canonical hour of the day, calling monks from their cells to the chapel. You notice how the sound itself imposes order, a simple yet powerful mechanism that organizes lives in a pattern of shared expectation. The bell does not hurry or delay. It simply marks time, and the monks respond with predictable precision, their movements already synchronized through years of repetition. You follow the procession into the chapel, where rows of monks in simple habits stand in near-perfect alignment. Their faces are calm, eyes lowered, hands folded. The air smells faintly of candle wax, incense, and cold stone. It is a sensory atmosphere that reinforces the rhythm of their lives, one designed to minimize distraction and maximize attention to spiritual practice. Each man here has learned to calibrate his mind to the monotony of ritual, where repetition is not tedious, but transformative, fostering a quiet discipline that can withstand years of unchanging routine. The chants begin, low and resonant, voices rising and falling in a measured cadence. The effect is hypnotic. You notice the subtle differences in each voice, some deep and sonorous, others thin and tremulous, but all unified into a single, continuous sound. This is the auditory heartbeat of monastic life. Hours stretch and fold into one another, defined not by sunrise and sunset, but by the repetition of prayers, readings, and psalms. It is monotonous, unremarkable in many ways, yet its constancy provides a framework for an existence entirely oriented around spiritual attentiveness. After matins, the monks return to their cells, small rooms scarcely larger than a modest bedroom. The walls are bare, save for a crucifix and perhaps a small shelf with a prayer book. There is little comfort, no luxury, but everything here is functional. Monks perform minor tasks: sweeping, arranging books, tending small gardens, or repairing habits. Each act is deliberate and deliberate in its restraint. There is no excess, only purpose. You see that the design of the space, the simplicity of objects, and the orderliness of routines all work together to maintain a consciousness tuned to the spiritual rhythm rather than worldly distraction. Breakfast is eaten in silence, in the refectory, where long wooden tables hold neatly arranged bowls and spoons. The food is plain: porridge, coarse bread, perhaps a piece of cheese. You notice that each monk follows a precise pattern, sitting in the same seat, lifting food in measured motions, consuming it slowly and deliberately. Conversation is minimal. It is not forbidden, but it is unnecessary. The meal itself is a ritual, an extension of the rhythm that governs every aspect of life here. It reinforces the mind's attunement to repetition, attention, and mindfulness in all actions. Following the meal, work begins. This can take many forms: tending gardens to grow vegetables for the kitchen, copying manuscripts in the scriptorium, or maintaining the abbey's infrastructure. The labor is monotonous, yet purposeful. Each task, though seemingly mundane, contributes to the survival of the abbey as a self-sufficient unit. You see a monk polishing brass candlesticks, each stroke deliberate, producing a shine that reflects the dim morning light. Another monk tends herbs, carefully pruning, planting, and watering, ensuring that the abbey's supply of medicinal and culinary plants remains adequate. Every gesture is small but necessary, a quiet contribution to a larger, collective system. Time in the abbey is measured not by hours, but by canonical divisions: lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. Each is punctuated by the ringing of a bell, signaling transitions with exactitude. There is no rush, no urgency beyond adherence to the schedule. The day is organized into a continuous cycle of prayer, labor, and study. Even mistakes: spilled ink, broken branches, missed recitation, are corrected with calm efficiency, woven seamlessly into the fabric of routine. You notice that the monk's focus is not on accomplishment in the worldly sense, but on the integrity of each action, the perfection of form, and the cultivation of patience. You wander through the scriptorium, watching a monk transcribe a manuscript. Each letter is carefully drawn, ink applied with precise pressure, and margins measured with meticulous care. Mistakes are corrected by scraping the parchment and starting anew. The process is slow, repetitive, and painstaking. Yet this is the essence of monastic scholarship: knowledge, preserved through the patient, almost hypnotic repetition of labor. The task itself is mundane, almost boring, but its significance lies in its continuity and the survival of learning across generations. In the cloister, you notice another layer of order. Monks walk in silent meditation, following a prescribed path, their steps measured, heads bowed, minds focused. Each movement reinforces discipline. Each repetition cultivates attention to detail, mindfulness, and spiritual endurance. Even in walking, life is regulated, shaped into an unbroken cycle of intentionality. There is no leisure here, in the modern sense. Rest is integrated into the schedule, measured carefully to sustain health and energy for the next canonical hour. Midday brings another round of work and prayer. The bell summons the monks to sext. Some carry baskets of herbs from the gardens. Others bring manuscripts for copying or repair. Every task is purposeful, aligned with survival of both the abbey and its spiritual mission. The quiet repetition of labor, intertwined with devotion, ensures that each monk remains fully engaged, grounded in rhythm, and attuned to the needs of the community. You notice how continuity itself becomes a kind of security, an anchor in the otherwise slow and meditative passage of time. You begin to understand the subtle psychology at work. The monotony is not oppressive, it is protective. Repetition focuses the mind, eliminates distraction, and cultivates endurance. Days blur into one another, yet each action reinforces awareness, care, and resilience. In this controlled, predictable environment, life is sustained through quiet consistency, not through drama or excitement. The monk's survival, spiritual and practical, depends on unbroken attention to the smallest details. The sweep of a broom, the scrape of a quill, the fold of a habit, the tending of a garden. As the afternoon wanes, vespers approaches. The bell tolls again, and the monks gather, standing in their familiar formation. You notice the beauty in this repetition, the alignment of bodies, the uniformity of chants, the echo of voices against stone. The hours of the day, once mundane and repetitive, culminate in a shared experience of rhythm and endurance. There is a quiet majesty here, uncelebrated and largely invisible to the outside world. And yet, as evening falls, a subtle question lingers in your mind. How does a life lived entirely within cycles of repetition and obedience shape the human spirit, and what do these countless hours of quiet labor contribute to the enduring continuity of knowledge, survival, and community? Morning has given way to a faint, slanting light, softening the cold stone walls of the abbey. You wander through the cloisters, noting how the sun highlights dust motes dancing in the air. Each step echoes gently across the stones, a reminder of both the emptiness and the order of this place. The monastery is alive, but its life is measured in quiet, precise rhythms, invisible to the hurried eyes of outsiders. It is here, in these small gestures and unhurried motions, that the true fabric of medieval monastic survival is woven. Work continues in every corner. In the garden, one monk tends to rows of medicinal herbs. He kneels on the frost-hardened earth, removing weeds, adjusting the spacing of plants, trimming dead leaves, and monitoring the soil for moisture. Each motion is small but deliberate, repeated over and over to maintain health and yield. A single oversight, a missed irrigation, a damaged root can have repercussions, depriving the abbey of necessary resources. You begin to see labor not simply as survival, but as a delicate negotiation between human diligence and natural systems. A quiet lesson in patience and precision. In the scriptorium, another monk hunches over a manuscript. Ink stains his fingers, and edges of parchment curl slightly under the pressure of repeated attention. Each letter must be uniform, each spacing precise. The pace is slow, painstaking, almost hypnotic. Mistakes are not tolerated lightly. Errors are scraped away, corrected, or rewritten. Here, time is measured, not in minutes or hours, but in lines and pages. The work is monotonous, almost painfully so, yet it preserves knowledge that might otherwise be lost. Every stroke of the quill is an act of survival for ideas, for literacy, for continuity across centuries. The kitchen hums with its own quiet labor. Pots are scraped, fires tended, loaves of coarse bread shaped and placed in the oven. Ingredients are counted and rationed carefully. Waste is minimized because every portion contributes to the abbey's endurance. Even the smallest action, a stirred pot, a kneaded dough, the careful stacking of firewood, is imbued with significance. In this place, survival is composed of thousands of tiny decisions, repeated with unwavering consistency. You notice how the monk's routines intertwine. The scribe depends on the water carried by another. The gardener relies on the baker's provision of bread. The healer counts on both. Each life is part of a larger, invisible network, sustained by quiet effort. By mid-morning, the bell calls for terce, a short service marking the third hour. You follow the procession into the chapel. The ritual is brief, but exacting. Monks align themselves. Voices rise and fall in measured cadence, and the silence between chants feels intentional, almost sacred. Prayer punctuates work, reminding the community that spiritual diligence is as crucial as labor. You notice how repetition itself functions as both discipline and refuge. The predictable rhythm calms the mind and ensures focus, preparing each monk for the next task, the next line of ink, the next planting or pruning. Later, in the cloister, novices practice physical tasks under the watchful eyes of senior monks. They sweep courtyards, polish brass fixtures, and carry water. Mistakes are met with patient correction rather than reprimand. The emphasis is on learning through repetition, internalizing precision, and cultivating endurance. You see how instruction in the monastery differs from education in the outside world. Here, survival and competence are inseparable from obedience and the accumulation of countless small habits. Lessons are not theoretical. They are lived, embodied, and repeated daily. You wander to the infirmary, where a monk tends to a sick brother. A careful ritual of washing, bandaging, and monitoring unfolds. Each step is deliberate. A clean cloth, folded exactly, a poultice applied with exact pressure, water brought to the right temperature. Life itself depends on these measured gestures. In these spaces, monotony becomes sacred. Repetition is survival. The monk's work is simultaneously physical, mental, and spiritual, a continuum of attention that sustains both bodies and community. In the afternoon, the bell signals sext. The monks gather again in the chapel. You notice how the day's labor has accumulated, how small physical fatigue and mental focus are counterbalanced by the rhythm of worship. Work and prayer are inseparable, each reinforcing the other. The constant repetition of mundane acts has produced resilience, bodies conditioned for endurance, minds disciplined for attention, spirits fortified against distraction. This is the machinery of continuity, the subtle architecture of survival over decades and centuries. Outside, in the vegetable garden, the sun warms the soil slightly, casting long shadows. You observe the meticulous care of plants, rows straight and evenly spaced, weeds removed methodically. Even the act of watering is carefully timed. In these small gestures, the monks harmonize with the natural world, shaping and preserving resources necessary for their continued survival. You realize that ordinary acts, planting, sweeping, copying texts, cooking, are the silent backbone of enduring institutions. They may not make history in dramatic strokes, but they preserve knowledge, health, and life itself. The novices are now engaged in cleaning the chapel. They dust pews, polish altar rails, and trim candles with careful attention. Every motion is rehearsed, deliberate, and necessary. You notice that repetition trains not only skill, but patience and resilience. The same actions, performed daily, build mastery and internal discipline. Life in the abbey is not chaotic. It is a carefully orchestrated flow where even boredom has purpose. Monotony is the medium through which survival, skill, and spiritual endurance are transmitted. Late afternoon brings none, another canonical hour. Monks gather briefly, offering prayers that punctuate the ongoing work. You begin to appreciate how their existence is a continuous oscillation between labor, study, and devotion. The schedule eliminates idleness and distraction, but it also cultivates endurance and focus. Each monk is trained in physical, intellectual, and spiritual repetition, a regimen that allows the community to function efficiently and persistently despite minimal resources. As evening approaches, some monks perform maintenance around the abbey, repairing roofs, tending fires, and securing tools. The tasks are small, often unnoticed, but absolutely essential. Each repaired hinge, swept floor, and polished surface ensures that the abbey continues to function smoothly, day after day, year after year. You begin to see the elegance in this pattern. Life is sustained, not by dramatic intervention, but by countless small acts performed with patience, precision, and care. The day concludes with Compline, the final canonical hour. In the chapel, the monks stand in silent reflection, voices raised only in the final chants. The ritual marks the end of one cycle, and the preparation for rest before the rhythm begins anew at dawn. You feel the weight of these routines, the endurance of hands, the discipline of minds, the continuity of knowledge, preserved in repetition. Survival, both spiritual and practical, depends on this relentless, uncelebrated grind. And as you watch the candles flicker in the chapel, one thought lingers quietly but persistently. If life is measured in repeated, deliberate acts, in small, unremarkable labors, then how much of what endures through time owes itself not to the heroic or the celebrated, but to the patient, unnoticed persistence of ordinary hands? The abbey settles into a hushed rhythm as evening deepens. The last rays of sun filter through tall, narrow windows, painting long shadows across the stone floors of the cloister. The day's labor has ended, but its echoes linger in the quiet spaces. The faint scent of ink from the scriptorium, the earthy aroma of tended gardens, and the warmth of hearth fires in the kitchens. You notice that even in stillness, the abbey breathes with a continuous pulse, an invisible rhythm of care, discipline, and endurance that has persisted for decades. Compline has concluded. Monks return to their cells, moving silently through the corridors. The soft shuffle of feet on stone, the careful closing of doors, and the occasional rustle of robes punctuate the otherwise deep silence. Each movement is deliberate, necessary, and integrated into the fabric of daily existence. You realize that this quiet vigilance extends beyond ritual. It encompasses every action, from repairing tools to polishing candlesticks, from tending gardens to copying manuscripts. Survival in this enclosed world is built on unbroken repetition, on attention to the minutiae of daily life, and on obedience to rhythm. You follow one monk back to his cell. The room is simple: a narrow bed, a small wooden desk, a prayer book, and a crucifix hanging on the wall. Everything has a designated place, and each object is functional. There is no clutter, no distraction, only what is necessary for work, study, and reflection. The monk sits at his desk, carefully arranging quills and ink pots before opening a manuscript for study. Even in solitude, the rhythm continues. Writing, reading, and reflecting form a seamless cycle. You notice how deeply repetition structures perception, shaping not only actions but thought, attention, and endurance itself. Outside, the gardens are quiet now. Moonlight glances off leaves. Frost sparkles faintly on soil, turned over earlier in the day. The long hours of labor have left subtle traces. Carefully pruned hedges, straight rows of herbs, tidy compost heaps. Each small gesture contributes to the larger survival of the abbey, a continuity built through patient attention. It is here, in these unnoticed acts, that life persists quietly, insulated from the chaos and uncertainty of the world beyond the walls. In the scriptorium, candles burn low. Though most work has ended, you glance at manuscripts stacked neatly, the results of hours of careful transcription. Knowledge is preserved here, not through spectacle or grandeur, but through endless, patient labor. Each letter, each margin, each carefully considered stroke of ink represents not only scholarship, but survival, the transmission of culture, information, and spiritual guidance across generations. The abbey itself is a repository of continuity, safeguarding human thought through quiet diligence. Night deepens further, and the abbey takes on a meditative stillness. The faint creaking of wood as the building settles, the soft sighing of wind through the cloisters, and the distant lapping of water from the abbey's stream create a gentle, unbroken symphony of life. You realize that even in this apparent silence, survival continues. Candles are tended, fires monitored, gardens watered where necessary, and cells kept ready for the next day. Life here is an ongoing accumulation of small, deliberate acts, each reinforcing stability, endurance, and continuity. You notice the novices, huddled together in their simple cells. They whisper softly, practicing prayers, reviewing lessons, and preparing for the next day. Their labor is both physical and mental, memorizing psalms, perfecting calligraphy, learning the rhythm of monastic life. Even their quiet movements are measured. Nothing is wasted, nothing left to chance. These routines form a subtle architecture of resilience, training young monks to sustain both themselves and the community through meticulous repetition. In the dormitory, the monks prepare for rest. Silence dominates, punctuated only by occasional coughs or the soft settling of bodies onto narrow beds. Sleep is measured, never indulgent. It is restorative, functional, and subordinate to the cycle of canonical hours. The mind trained in repetition continues to observe, even in slumber, attuned to the rhythm of the abbey and the responsibilities that await at dawn. Even rest, it seems, is an extension of endurance. You step into the cloister one last time, breathing in the cool night air. The abbey, for all its stone and shadow, feels alive in a quiet, disciplined way. Its vitality is not dramatic or outwardly impressive. It is built from decades of patient labor, meticulous routines, and unwavering adherence to structure. You think about the countless monks who have walked these same paths, tended the same gardens, polished the same surfaces, and copied the same manuscripts. Each generation adds to a continuum, an invisible chain of survival and knowledge that stretches far beyond individual lifespans. You consider the broader lesson embedded in this quiet endurance. Outside these walls, history is often measured in battles, treaties, and grand achievements. But within the abbey, history is measured differently, in the preservation of knowledge, the careful cultivation of life, and the disciplined repetition of acts that ensure survival. Time here is not spectacular. It is patient, unhurried, and profoundly consequential. Havigly-tacular, another Parmond. The abbey at night is a testament to the ordinary human capacity for persistence. Its rhythm continues beyond the attention of outsiders, sustained by countless small gestures repeated with unwavering care. Each act, mundane though it may seem, contributes to the survival of a community, the continuity of knowledge, and the endurance of human culture. You realize that the lives of these monks, largely unnoticed, have profound historical significance, ensuring that ideas, resources, and spiritual guidance persist despite the passage of centuries. As you leave the abbey for the night, the soft peal of a distant bell echoes across the courtyard. It is a reminder that the cycle will resume at dawn, unchanged in its discipline and order. Life in the abbey is unbroken, resilient, and invisible, a continuous practice of endurance in which every small action matters. You understand finally that this is the hidden architecture of survival: repetition, patience, and quiet attention, unnoticed by the world, but essential to human continuity. And as you walk away under a star-filled sky, one final thought lingers. In a world obsessed with drama and spectacle, perhaps it is the unheralded persistence of ordinary labor, repeated quietly across years and generations, that shapes the course of history in ways we seldom recognize. You arrive at the forge before dawn, when the village is still wrapped in the soft grey hush of early morning. Smoke curls from chimneys, carrying the faint tang of smouldering coal. The smell of iron and ash is heavy in the air, grounding you in a place both ancient and vital. The forge itself is small and unassuming, yet its presence dominates the surrounding houses. Here, life is measured not in hours or days, but in the rhythm of hammer striking anvil, of metal heated and cooled, shaped and hardened. The blacksmith is already at work, sleeves rolled up, apron tied tightly. He stands before the fire, eyes fixed on the glowing metal in the tongs. Sparks leap into the air with each strike of hammer on iron, and the sound resonates through the workshop. A rhythmic, almost musical clanging that is both hypnotic and demanding. The forge is alive, and the blacksmith is its conductor, controlling heat, timing, and force with the precision of a seasoned craftsman. You notice the layout of the workshop. Tools arranged in orderly rows, each with a designated purpose. Hammers of varying sizes, tongs, chisels, and punches, carefully positioned for efficiency. The bellows, operated with steady foot pressure, feed air into the hearth, maintaining a fire at the precise temperature necessary for working iron. Every element is optimized for routine, endurance, and survival. both of the craftsman and of the village that relies upon him. Outside the workshop, the village begins to stir. Farmers move slowly along dirt roads, carrying baskets of vegetables or tending livestock. Children appear, clinging to the edges of chores performed by older siblings. The blacksmith's work is deeply interwoven with this ordinary life. Tools and nails, hinges and horseshoes, all are essential to the functioning of the community. Without the rhythm of the forge, the village's everyday labor would falter. In this quiet interdependence, survival is as much a product of repetitive craftsmanship as of agricultural skill. Inside the forge, the blacksmith picks up a red-hot piece of iron and places it on the anvil. Each blow of the hammer is deliberate. The force, the angle, and the rhythm calibrated to the metal's temperature and composition. You notice the subtle adjustments he makes, the way he tilts the iron, listens to the sound of the hammer, and observes the glow of the metal. This work is exacting, demanding attention and patience. Mistakes are costly. A flawed blade, a weakened hinge, or a misaligned horseshoe could have consequences far beyond the workshop. The forge operates on a cyclical rhythm, dictated by the cooling and heating of the metal. The blacksmith feeds one piece of iron into the fire while shaping another on the anvil. He pauses periodically, wiping sweat from his brow, examining a finished piece, and planning the next step. Time is absorbed into action, measured not in minutes, but in sequences of labor. Heat, hammer, cool, shape, repeat. Each cycle reinforces skill, endurance, and the quiet mastery of a craft passed down through generations. Apprentices work nearby, observing intently and handling smaller tasks. They tend the coals, fetch water for quenching, and prepare tools for the blacksmith's use. Their movements are repetitive, calculated, and cautious. Each action is designed to teach patience, accuracy, and respect for the material. You notice how their hands begin to mirror the rhythm of the master, subtly absorbing knowledge through repetition rather than instruction. Learning here is slow, deliberate, and painstaking, an education built on endurance rather than spectacle. You move to the edge of the forge, noticing the materials that surround the workspace. Rods of iron stacked neatly against the wall, scraps of metal sorted by size and composition, coal piled in measured amounts. Everything is arranged for efficiency, survival, and continuity. The blacksmith must maintain not only his skill, but also his supplies. A shortage of coal, water, or iron would halt work, jeopardizing both his livelihood and the functioning of the village. Survival, in this context, is as much about planning and preparation as it is about labor. Outside, you hear the distant bray of a donkey, the clatter of carts on dirt roads, and the occasional shout from a field. Life carries on around the forge, but it is inseparable from its rhythm. Every nail hammered, every tool fashioned, every hinge shaped is a contribution to the functioning of the larger community. The blacksmith is at once an artisan, laborer, and vital node in a network of survival. His day is long, his work repetitive, yet each act is indispensable. By midday, the forge is filled with the combined smell of heated metal, sweat, and ash. The apprentice fetches water from a nearby trough to cool a newly shaped blade. Sparks leap higher now as the blacksmith works on a particularly stubborn piece of iron, each blow of the hammer echoing across the workshop. The intensity is exhausting, yet controlled. The rhythm is unbroken, the focus absolute. You notice how skill is maintained, not through inspiration or creativity alone, but through relentless repetition, careful observation, and the accumulation of countless small actions. Lunch is simple and taken quickly. Bread, cheese, and ale are consumed with minimal interruption. Conversation is sparse, mostly consisting of practical instruction or brief observations. The rhythm of work does not allow long breaks. The forge dictates the pace of life. Even sustenance is measured, integrated into the cycle of labor, rather than allowed to disrupt it. You notice the subtle efficiency. Every gesture, from lifting a mug to moving a tool, is purposeful. Ordinary acts are elevated by necessity into essential elements of endurance. The afternoon begins with more delicate tasks. A small iron lock must be repaired, requiring careful attention to detail. The black